Thanks for joining us. It's obviously a moment of significance for Canada, for British Columbia, and certainly for the United States as well. We have heard the President of the United States say that it's his intention to impose tariffs on Saturday, and there has been a repetition of that commitment from key members of the administration. This is obviously a huge concern to British Columbians, and even if they're not directly working in export-related industries, knowing how whole communities rely on jobs that involve exports to the United States are, to this point, closest friends and allies, and in many cases, family members as well. Everything that we are doing in government right now, every decision that we're taking, every action by ministers is going through the lens of what these tariffs mean for British Columbia and ensuring that we're in position to respond, to support people, support families, and support businesses through this tariff. The federal government today has been indicating that they have prepared measures to support Canadians across the country who may be directly affected by tariffs. I want to assure British Columbians of two things. One is that we're going to work to make sure that the federal government keeps to those commitments, that they treat this as seriously as they did the COVID response. And for our part here in British Columbia, that we will fill in the gaps to make sure that British Columbians are protected. I'll say this too. British Columbians are strong. We are resilient. This is a significant threat. But I wouldn't want to be anywhere else in the world facing a threat like this other than British Columbia. We have the people, we have the skills, we have the access to the port, we have the resources to come out the other side of this threat stronger, more independent, building more things for ourselves, growing more things for ourselves, and building partnerships with countries around the world that want to do business with a strong, democratic country that prioritizes its people and its relationships around the world. And we will make sure that if the tariffs come in, that the lesson that is learned by the United States is that we are tough. There is no free lunch here in Canada or in British Columbia. We will support the federal government on matching tariffs. We'll do our part in BC to identify other ways of making sure that every harm that is inflicted on British Columbia families is met and matched with a response to the United States. With that, I'm happy to take your questions and look forward to our discussion here today.
Thank you, Premier, and thank you everyone for joining us here today at Canada Place. We have media here in person and on the phone lines. All reporters will have one question and one follow-up. We're going to start here at Canada Place with Brenna Owen from the Canadian Press.
Thank you. Premier, so you've just mentioned the pandemic-style kind of relief plans. Could you just provide a little bit more detail on what this could look like here in BC?
Thanks. There's a couple components to supporting people through this period. One is that we know that part of the proposed federal response is retaliatory tariffs on the United States on billions of dollars of U.S. imports into Canada. That'll result in the federal government collecting a significant amount of money that should be immediately deployed across the country to affected individuals and businesses to help them survive and to diversify their markets and to move to other markets other than the United States. Obviously, Ontario and Quebec, with their integrated auto market with the United States, are in a very different position than British Columbia, but BC families will need support during this period as well. Employment insurance for people who are laid off temporarily as employers face canceled orders potentially from the United States, some of which we're hearing already. For businesses where their order books are drying up as their customers try to figure out how to deal with this, that they have access to cash to be able to stay open and to weather this and identify new markets. Whatever it takes to make sure that we come out the other end stronger is very important. Through COVID, we supported businesses here in British Columbia with grants to be able to get through. The federal government had loans. They provided people supports who were laid off through employment insurance. These are the kinds of responses that we expect to see through this period. The projections that we have seen indicate that this could be more serious for our provincial economy than the 2008 recession, and certainly the most severe economic impact we've seen in a while here in Canada and British Columbia. And unfortunately, it'll have significant effects on the Americans as well. I think there's still time for President Trump to work with us, because there is a strong desire on the part of the premiers and the federal government to address the concerns the president has raised. This isn't a fight we asked for. We don't want it. We don't need it. But we are willing to respond to these tariffs proportionately and as is required. We're willing to fight for our country.
Follow-up, Brenna?
Thank you. So your government is going to be delivering a budget soon. So how can you make these plans? How is this tariff threat affecting the plans when there's still so much doubt around whether this is going to come to pass?
Thanks. And that's an important thing that I want British Columbians to know, is as our finance minister is pulling together the budget, as she's doing the work with her team in the Ministry of Finance, every decision is being made through the lens of British Columbia and Canada potentially heading into a protracted trade war with the United States, and all the consequences that that could mean for families around lower dollar resulting in higher costs for groceries, around potential impacts to employment, and everything that brings with it, including the inability to make payments on your house, whether it's rent or a mortgage. This is a big deal for families. We're going to make sure that we have the resources available to support people, whatever the consequences are. There's always the possibility that we don't see those kinds of impacts, or we don't see the tariffs, or they're different than were advertised. You just never know. And so hopefully, we'll hope for the best. But British Columbia should know that we are preparing for the worst, and we're going to be in a position to support them alongside the federal government.
Thank you, Premier. Next, we'll head to Jack Morris from City News.
Thank you. So we've heard some other provinces doing things to try to address, at least what Trump says are his concerns, such as deploying conservation officers. Are you looking at anything here in BC to address these border concerns that Donald Trump has raised as part of these tariff threats?
So we've made repeated commitments to the federal government that as part of a coordinated border effort across the country, we're willing to do whatever's necessary to support that. But what we won't be doing here in British Columbia is taking over the responsibility of the federal government along the border. It's federal government responsibility for a reason. It runs through every province. Having piecemeal responses is try everything. I don't criticize my colleagues for doing this. But really, this does need to be a nationally coordinated effort. And frankly, that's why I have made the case to the Prime Minister directly that there needs to be some consistency at the federal level between the federal Liberal leadership race, the very strong likelihood of an upcoming federal election, and regardless, a new administration, whatever the party is, post-election, that there needs to be some consistency in the federal government response across the country. And that means an individual or individuals that won't be out campaigning during a federal election, that aren't swept up in the Liberal leadership race. And the premiers will do our part. But there are core responsibilities that the federal government cannot avoid that we need them to do, which includes our relationships with other countries, protecting the border, responding to the border concerns, responding to the call for additional military investments. And I'm a big fan of Dom LeBlanc. I think he's a great guy, and I wish him the best. But he is also going to be in a federal election as well. And having that consistency throughout this period is going to be absolutely crucial. And unfortunately, we have not yet seen that response from the federal government, that they're going to have that consistent presence through an election federally and out the other side.
Do you have a follow-up, Jack?
I do. So you've been talking a lot about everything being on the table, about concerns about being able to provide some of the things that were promised throughout the election. It's a word that people are avoiding, but are we entering an austerity period now?
Well, I mean, the concern that I have is that on our own internal projections, we're showing that these tariffs will put British Columbia into a recession provincially, and also extremely likely that it will do the same federally. BC is the least affected province by the proposed tariffs on our measurements. And when we look at provinces like Ontario and Quebec, the impacts could be quite devastating. And that is not even to talk about the impact on Americans of more expensive everything from pasta to electricity to filling up at the pump. So a lot of people are going to be hurt by this on both sides of the border. And the response from our government is we're going to make sure the frontline services are there for people that they're counting on, the healthcare, the education, all of those pieces. It is requiring, and you see it in the mandate letters to all my ministers, for every single minister to look at the programs in their ministries and say, does this meet the moment now in 2025 of tariffs and the situation that we face and the supports people need? Or is this responsive to the concerns of 2017 or 2020 or 2022? And so if it doesn't meet the moment for tariffs, then it has to be revisited and redirected to the support that people need. I think that British Columbians and Canadians are like myself. We were all hoping that the president was just angling for a negotiation around our free trade agreement across North America. But it seems very likely that he is committed to imposing these tariffs, even if they harm Americans, even if they harm Canadians. And so we need to be prepared for that, even though it makes absolutely no sense.